At the epicenter of the world's greatest city, they built a theater big enough to be its heart.
My first memory of Radio City Music Hall was how huge it was, how exciting it was. I couldn't wait to come again and again and again.
For most of its long history, Radio City Music Hall was the most popular movie palace in America. The place every movie studio begged to have for their world premieres.
Watching movies inside of Radio City was fantastic because the screen was so large. It was totally enveloping. It was like taking a bath in a movie.
But the most glamorous part of Radio City was never the movies.
My mom took me, and that was it. You know, I thought, I'm going to be a rockette. That's what I want to be.
In the last 2 decades, Radio City has become one of the world's great stages, home to everyone from Frank Sinatra to Celine Dion.
This is it. Play the music hall, you've reached the top.
But if Radio City has seen some spectacular heights, it has also endured the darkest times imaginable.
I'm announcing the closing of Radio City Music Hall.
Tonight, an American saga. From the Depression to the millennium, the story of Radio City Music Hall.
It's sexy. It's a sexy place.
Hello, I'm Lauren Bacall, and welcome to Radio City Music Hall. Chances are you've been here before. After all, Radio City has been one of New York's top tourist attractions for almost 70 years. But tonight you're going to see a side of Radio City that most people haven't experienced, from its backstage secrets to its glorious history, told by those who know Radio City best, the people who've worked, danced, lived, even loved within these hallowed walls. Radio City's grandeur is breathtaking and timeless. To this day, it remains one of America's architectural masterpieces. The man behind it was John D. Rockefeller, Jr., one of the world's richest men. He envisioned Radio City as the entertainment cornerstone of his city under a single roof, Rockefeller Center. But Rockefeller Center meant much more to America than some new buildings. Almost single-handedly, it kept alive the nation's hope for the future.
You have to remember this building being conceived in the depths of the Depression. Many people were very disturbed about the future of America, the feeling that the economic system had in fact failed, and there were very serious concerns about the rise of communism, and perhaps that was a better way, a better system than ours. And there was great turmoil and great upheavals. So this belief in the value of free enterprise, this statement of its worth, was manifest all throughout Rockefeller Center.
Radio City's opening night, December 27th, 1932, was the business and social event in New York that year. If, as Frank Sinatra would later say, you had made it there, you still had to beg to get into opening night. There were more than 100,000 requests for tickets.
There was fantastic anticipation about opening night. I mean, imagine in the depths of the Depression, opening up this extraordinary building, and people appeared from all over in black tie, and this was the moment.
Well, this is a very great occasion, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone present here tonight are in for a very delightful evening.
What a marvelous occasion. Oh, what a marvelous theater. You should be here too.
It had taken more than 3 years of planning, preparation, and building, and the attention to detail was breathtaking. The first people inside were staggered by the majesty they found themselves part of.
No one had ever seen those great chandeliers, which are 2.5 stories tall, hanging in the foyer. And there's no room like it anywhere else in the world. The great lobby reminds you of an ocean liner. but never was there a room so tall in any ocean liner. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. There was certainly nothing in the city like it, and the degree to which it was beautifully appointed, the materials, the colors, and most particularly the lighting.
It reminds you of a time that was much more romantic, where the attention to detail was immense. You know, the way that the scrolling looks, the way the seats were furnished, the way the fountain goes, the way the bathrooms look.
The men's room is a cathedral of urinals. The scale of it, the simplicity of it. It's an amazing place.
One of the difficulties they had on opening night was getting people to their seats because they wanted to see the building. They were amazed by this building and by all the other stuff going on. By that I mean primarily the ushers in their military uniforms with the white gloves actually doing almost a Buckingham Palace changing of the guard in the lobby. 30 ushers up the stairs and 30 ushers down the stairs. And the show was the building as much as it was what was going to be inside the hall.
Rockefeller had spared nothing in building Radio City. He hired the best, including interior designer Donald Deskey, and with a great deal of fanfare and publicity, producer Samuel L. Rothafel, known as Roxy, the most famous showman in the country.
At the time that Roxy became involved with the Rockefellers, he was not only the most dominant figure in the entertainment industry as a presenter and producer, he was this enormous cultural figure. There's nothing like him today.
Hello, Francis.
Howdy, Mr. Roxy.
How are you all this evening?
Oh,
Roxy had perfected a hugely successful formula, which paired silent movies, extravagant stage shows, and the most opulent theaters he could build. The names of his New York theaters, the Strand, the Rialto, the Rivoli, the Capitol, and finally, the theater he named after himself, the Roxy, would be imitated all across America.
And he really changed the face of live entertainment in America by tying the motion picture into the vaudeville tradition. And he was at the peak of his power and his fame with his own self-named, the eponymous Roxy Theater.
But only 3 years after his ultra-luxurious theater opened, Roxy was lured away by Rockefeller and a dream to build the ultimate theater, the greatest stage in the world.
When the Rockefeller group invited Roxy to put his stamp of showmanship on the new music hall, he did, but in an incredible way. He took everything he learned throughout his entire career and improved it that much more to make it state-of-the-art at Radio City. He wanted the largest stage in the world, and he got it. He also developed a concept for theatrical construction which had no barriers or obstructions within the theater. Everybody was treated like royalty, whether they sat in the orchestra section or the mezzanine. The seats were comfortable throughout the house with perfect sight lines. So the music hall was the climax of the era.
He was famously succinct about the role of the promoter-producer. Don't give the public what they want. Give them what they don't know they want. Give them something better than what they want.
Radio City's stage was designed to be the best equipped in the world. The stage manager controlled 13 motors driving a turntable in the middle of the proscenium. And the stage itself is actually 3 elevators, each able to soar 13 feet above stage level or plunge 27 feet below.
It is a mechanical wonderland, especially when you think that it was designed back in 1930, 1931.
All of this was far more advanced than certainly any other theater in America. Hydraulic systems were studied in World War II for aircraft carriers to provide the lifts to get the planes up on the flight deck.
So during World War II, they had guards posted in case any spies came to look and see how complicated and wonderful the Radio City stage equipment was and steal it for the Germans.
And Roxy's secrets didn't stop at the stage. Backstage, he built a maze that included hidden passageways and secret rooms, including an apartment for himself. Roxy had good reason to construct such a showplace. He intended to create something bigger and different than he had ever done before. The one thing that he didn't include was motion pictures.
Roxy had sworn, I'm moving beyond the movies this time.
Roxy had this madcap idea. There would be an audience for a kind of higher form of vaudeville. And it was a complete misjudging of an audience. And terribly ironic, because here was a man who really felt he was in tune with the public, who really, more than anybody, was this great showman, knew his public.
Radio City Music Hall was the first auditorium in the world to be built with air conditioning. We'll be back with more on AMC's Hollywood Lives and Legends.
The lowest point of Roxy's life should have been his highest, the opening night of the music hall. But right from the outset, the omens pointed to complete disaster.
For one thing, the weather didn't cooperate. It was December 27th, 1932, and by at least rain, maybe sleet, maybe some snow, the opening was delayed because people were having so much trouble getting to the theater. Traffic was backed up.
But nothing was going to stop this great event. The line, there were hundreds of cops on the streets and limousines lined up from on 6th Avenue from 50th Street all the way down into the 30s, and crowds of people coming to see it.
That night, one after the other, 16 acts performed on the 144-foot stage. Almost half a football field of stage to be filled. Ray Bolger, who hadn't been cast as yet as the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, the Flying Wallendas, doing their death-defying, high-flying magic, Martha Graham's company took to the stage, as did a line of dancers known as the Roxyettes, who danced in mirror image fashion, all in a row.
Roxy, in his desperate wish to be greater and grander than he had ever been before, to put on a show like the world had never seen, put on this incredibly long, lumbering, inappropriate stage show that lasted until 2 in the morning, and people were leaving at 11 o'clock, and they were exhausted by then.
With Rockefeller himself watching from seat 206 in the first mezzanine, Roxy, sensing the audience's unhappiness, collapsed under the pressure. Roxy left the theater that night, feet first, carried out on a stretcher. He died 3 years later.
Opening night was really kind of the beginning of the end for Roxy. I really do feel like his spirit was broken by what a huge failure Radio City was within those first 2 weeks, and losing that kind of money, and the Roxy touch kind of, no longer being gold.
He was ruined by it. It destroyed him physically, it destroyed him emotionally, it sapped him of his confidence, and it also led to the Rockefellers pushing him out.
After the disastrous opening night, Radio City went from a treasure to a joke overnight. Many of the theater's 6,200 seats went empty, and Rockefeller found himself swimming in red ink. He knew he had to do something and do it fast. Radio City Music Hall was designed to be the world's most glamorous vaudeville theater. But in the first 2 weeks after its December 1932 opening, it lost over $200,000. And John D. Rockefeller decided something was missing. Movies. 2 weeks later, Radio City was showing films in addition to the stage show. The first film was director Frank Capra's Bitter Tea of General Yen. But it was seeing one of Hollywood's first real smash hits, King Kong, on the biggest screen in the world, that put Radio City Music Hall on the road to movie history.
people who went to movies in those days, you know, they were not the swells. I mean, they're just ordinary people, but for an extra $1 to, they kind of have this experience that seemed to them sort of the ultra in luxury and glamour, and it must have been very stirring for them.
It wasn't only the theater that was sophisticated. Radio City developed a reputation for selecting movies that were as classy as the theater itself. And before long, studios were fighting to get on its oversized screen. Radio City soon became a magnet for movie stars, world leaders, and even royalty. If you were looking for the brightest lights in New York, you didn't have to look any farther than the music hall.
The excitement usually was generated when a John Wayne or a Sophia Loren picture was playing at the theater. And then they would make a special presentation, and they'd have a ceremony, and the press would come.
Russell B. Downing, president of the Music Hall, presents an illuminated scroll honoring Grant as the famed New York Showplace's all-time favorite movie star and box office champion.
If a dignitary came to New York, it was impossible for them not to be photographed at Radio City Music Hall. There's the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. There's Eleanor Roosevelt. There's the King of Iraq. There's the young King Hussein. I mean, you look through the archives, it was like one of the stations of the Publicity Cross. You had to be there.
Radio City soon became the #1 tourist attraction in New York. 6 million people a year jammed the theater's rafters. Twice as many as visited the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, and the United Nations combined. And Radio City gave them more than their money's worth. Along with the movie came a live show that was worth far more than the price of admission alone.
It was an entire environment that provided the entertainment. You saw a movie, you saw a stage show, and you saw the building itself.
Those stage shows were magnificent. I mean, what a buy.
Radio City stage shows were legendary. There was a corps de ballet of 35 dancers, a symphony orchestra, and a glee club whose 25 members could reach the 3rd mezzanine a cappella. And behind the curtain, there were the 2 geniuses who pulled the strings. Leon Leonidoff, a protege of Roxy, the man who had started it all, and Judy Garland's future husband, Vincent Minnelli.
And my father was there from 1933 to 1935. And he ended up doing the costumes and the sets and the lighting and producing and directing. He brought in surrealism and kind of an African motif, very bold. I think that the training and the pace that Radio City kept when it was doing those shows one week after another had a lot to do with training anybody, but in particular, I'm talking about my father, for going to Hollywood.
He created these incredible settings which have never been surpassed, and some of which I understand they still use to this day. And he was so involved with every aspect of the productions there because everything had to be perfect for him.
In 2 years at the Music Hall, Minnelli created over 100 sets, and it took a trio of designers to replace him when he left. As for producer Leon Leonidoff, the immigrant from Romania made Radio City his home for a lifetime. The creator of the Christmas Spectacular and the Easter Show put so many spectacles on stage that the wardrobe department had to spin out more than 100,000 costumes to keep pace.
I'd say for the most part, the audience loved Leonidoff's shows because they were full of great emotions. He was very sentimental, and he was very proud of being in America, and he would pull out all the stops. He would have the Statue of Liberty and anything that was really dramatic and glamorous and glitzy, the audience loved.
But however miraculous the backdrop, the real stars of Radio City were the 36 women masquerading as a single entity, the Rockettes. The group was started in St. Louis in 1925 by dancer and choreographer Russell Marquardt. Marquardt had been inspired by a British group called the John Tiller Girls, but he envisioned more complicated routines for his dancers, and he wanted them to be distinctly American.
His vision, he was a visionary, but how he felt was that the Rockettes should be the girl next door type. They should look like the girl next door.
Terry Garr's mother, Phyllis Lind, joined the group when they were still known as the Missouri Rockets.
She has a little book that's a diary of 1926 or something like that, and she auditioned for Rockettes, got in, Russell Marquardt, just, you know, she loved it. She was an original Rockette, she's very proud of that, and she made it a big deal, like it was the most important thing in the world.
It was Samuel L. Rothafel, Roxy, who brought Russell Marquardt and his Missouri Rockets first to the Roxy Theater, where they were known as the Roxyettes, and then to the Music Hall, as one of the few successful acts on that disastrous opening night in 1932. And ever since that very first night, when you think of Radio City, you think of the Rockettes.
Measuring at 144 feet wide and 66 feet deep, the great stage at Radio City Music Hall is considered the most perfectly equipped stage in the world. We'll be back with more on AMC's Hollywood Lives and Legends.
Rockettes returned from Paris aboard the liner Normandy, following their appearance at the International Exposition.
I can recall even in the days when we had all the ensembles, when the announcement said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to present the world-famous Radio City Rockettes," the whole audience would just get ready for this one, because this was the big act. There's something about seeing 36 women in a line from 50th Street to 51st Street, framed by a proscenium with that sunburst effect, that's incomparable.
The effect was not lost on the tens of thousands of children who came to Radio City Music Hall. They came into the theater completely unique, but left sharing a common dream.
I was like in fairyland, and I said, I want to be one of those.
After the show was over, I turned to my mother and I said, I want to be a Rockette.
People would say to me when I was young, you know, what would you like to be when you grow up? And I'd say, well, I'm going to be a Rockette. And they'd say, well, that's very nice, dear, but what are you going to be when you grow up? And I'd say, no, I'm going to be a Rockette.
Russell Marquardt saw new dancers every year, but most of the thousands of girls who came to audition left disappointed. Many found out they didn't measure up even before they put their dance shoes on.
When you audition for the Rockettes, you walk underneath a doorway, and if your head grazes the door, you're too tall. And if your head is below a line marked along that doorway, you're too short. End of career.
They have this measuring tape on the wall, and it's still there today, I believe. I don't think they removed it. And he says, I don't know if you're going to be tall enough. And I said, oh, yes, I am. He looked at me like, what does she know? But I was tall enough.
I think that in the very beginning, it was a minimum of 5'3.5" and a maximum of 5'7", and today it's 5'5.5" to 5'9", which is a change in the species, I guess.
Height limits were only one of Marquardt's requirements to become a Rockette. His goal was to mold the dancers into a single unit with a precise look, and all deviations from that look were grounds for dismissal.
He was a strict disciplinarian. If you were late twice, that was it. You were out. Or if you had gained too much weight. As a matter of fact, when I was first accepted, they had fired a girl for being overweight, and she'd been there 5 years.
For those fortunate enough to be chosen, it wasn't just a job or even a career. Being a Rockette was your whole life. Every day, 7 days a week, for 45 years, the Rockettes performed 5 shows a day. And some Rockettes stayed at Radio City for as long as 35 years.
We lived in the music hall as a fairly insulated life. You would come in at 9 o'clock in the morning and leave at 10 o'clock at night. And you could literally not leave the theater the whole day.
If girls had come from the Bronx or Long Island and they wanted to stay overnight for rehearsal mornings, they stayed in the dormitory, and nearby the dormitory was a hospital in case anybody got sick.
We had a cafeteria. We had a roof that you could go up on in the summertime and relax and play badminton or whatever.
They'd go up on the roof and they'd film things and they'd take pictures. They'd be in the gypsy costume and the Hawaiian costume and the this costume.
We sort of lived like one huge family, I'd say.
Make that one huge, perfect family. Because no matter how new or difficult the routine, the one thing the Rockettes had to be was absolutely flawless.
You had to be a precision dancer, you know, be exactly right with the other people.
Nobody is a star. Everybody is a star, but you're part of a team. There are no individuals there. So you learn to work with the girls, and precision is teamwork.
Even the untrained eye will immediately go to the girl that is having a little too much fun with it and throwing her arm a little too high or kicking a little too high because she can, and perhaps might be a candidate for a step-out role. That is a liability if you're a Rockette.
You do not express yourself when you're a Rockette. You do as you're told.
There's one thing the Rockettes never have to be told to do. The dance step that has become completely identifiable to them. When you go see the Rockettes, you're just waiting for those kicks.
High kicks, fan kicks, flip kicks, hitch kicks. There are so many types of kicks. Strut kicks. To be a Rockette was the best thing in the world you could ever become.
When you do kick in line, of course, you don't want to lean on the person next to you. You don't want to pull that person down. It may look like the girls are holding on, but they're not.
It's very hard. I think that they add up. It's like 1,000 kicks a performance. It's something really grueling.
Russell Market tried to protect his dancers as much as possible. But when you have that many attractive women in one place, sooner or later, a fox is going to try to get into the henhouse. And that's exactly what happened when a $34 a week usher, Gavin MacLeod, broke the rules and fell in love with one of the Rockettes.
People laughed at. She said, "You're going to be engaged to an usher? You're going crazy, you know." Well, I guess she cared about me, so she said, "I will. I like him." I think that was a very romantic part of my life, and that was the first major love of my life.
Most people didn't marry Rockettes, but almost everyone has, at one time or another, fallen in love with them. In the 75 years since Russell Market first imagined them, the Rockettes have become far more than just another dance troupe. They're part of the fabric of America.
I'm sure he never thought when he started this small line of girls in 1925 that this would be ongoing, and there's such an interest in it. I mean, people just love the Rockettes. It's magic. You just mentioned the word Rockette, and everyone has a wonderful memory of it. And I think that's really Russell's legacy.
There are very few institutions left that have survived since the 1930s and that still exist today without betraying who they were and where they came from.
Quite often we'd have a standing ovation at the end of the routine, and you just see people standing. From the orchestra, it just appeared that, a wave of people would just stand all the way up to the sky.
There's something about the sound of applause. There's something about that theater that it's magic, and there's no other. I've never experienced anything like it since. It's overwhelming.
Christmas in New York is always a magical time of year, and one steeped in tradition. This is particularly true at Rockefeller Center, where since 1931, New York's tree has shone over the skating rink, and where the Radio City Christmas Spectacular, first staged by Leon Leonidoff in 1933, is still going strong after more than 65 years. Today, 1 million people a year still flock to Radio City during the holidays. Outside, the marquee welcomes families from across the country. And inside, there's nothing short of a traditional winter wonderland. And after more than half a century, the Rockettes have become almost as much a part of Christmas as the Nativity.
The Christmas show is wonderful. There's Santa Claus, and then there's 25 Santa Clauses kicking their legs.
The Nutcracker and Nativity and the Parade of the Wooden Soldiers have in one form or another been in that show for a long time. You couldn't call that number dancing. It really is basically a lot of marching and formations and drill, but the simplicity of it and the story is astounding.
People will occasionally say to me that, well, some of the routines the Rockettes do are very simple. Well, they may appear simple, but they require a tremendous amount of rehearsal to reach the point where they look so easy and smooth and flow as well as they do. It's a lot of rehearsing.
Radio City thrived for decades with its great films and dazzling stage shows. But by the late 1960s, all the other great movie palaces had disappeared. And Radio City, still a jewel, but now a frayed and tarnished jewel, was becoming obsolete. It didn't help that management, in an era of increasingly edgier filmmaking, refused to keep up with the times.
When the movie rating system comes in around 1970, they are only showing general audience pictures. They aren't even showing PGs. They were a little bit afraid of that. And that killed the music halls business.
I think that Radio City in its way was not slick, was not hip, was not, quote, young. So that people, especially starting in the late 60s, early 70s, it wasn't a place where you would go. And also, Radio City was a long-time commitment. Who's going to sit? If you're going to see a movie and then one of those shows, it's like a 4-hour thing.
They said, well, it's like a temporary downturn. They didn't realize it was actually, you know, in its modest way, a kind of a cultural revolution that was going on. And it was, you know, that wave was going this way, and they were left, you know, on their little rocky island there, you know, 51st Street.
The costume shop located above the hall has no access to elevators, which means the over 500,000 costumes made there had to be individually carried down to the theater. We'll be back with more on AMC's Hollywood Lives and Legends.
Old saying that no man is an island, and no theater, not even Radio City, can be one either. By the late 1970s, attendance had dropped so sharply that there was even talk of tearing the Great Hall down.
Radio City Music Hall begins to lose quite a bit of money in the 1970s. They start firing, close down the ballet corps, shut down the glee club, cut back on the number of Rockettes.
Instead of 3,000 some odd people out there, there's only like 200, you know, and you can see empty seats, which was kind of frightening. You sort of felt like you could see the handwriting on the wall.
The show went on yesterday, but as the tourists were filing in, the president of Rockefeller Center was saying the music hall shows would come to an end after this Easter.
I'm announcing the closing of Radio City Music Hall.
I can remember the day very well when I opened up the paper and it was on the front page that Radio City was going to close after the Easter show.
I just stood there with my mouth open, I guess, in shock, and I think I still am in shock.
Well, my reaction was always, no, that won't happen. It can't possibly happen.
It was the Rockettes who came to the music hall's rescue. The women took the battle to the streets, going out in front of the music hall between shows and getting average people, the people who had been filling the theater's seats for decades, to help them fight to save it.
I give most of the credit to the people who work there. The alumni associations of the Rockettes and the Ballet Corps particularly were incredible.
We went out in between each show. There were 4 shows a day. And we went out while the movie was on and collected signatures.
New York rallied. It was wonderful. We've had thousands and thousands of letters, telling please keep the music hall open. And everybody was out trying to save the music hall.
Of course, they made great TV. They were exceedingly photogenic, and if they came out and they did a kick in front of the building in a line, you can bet that all the television cameras were there, and they were really able to motivate a great deal of support. And it was saved in a finish that was, right out of a movie from the 30s. It was, almost the night before the wrecking balls came.
On March 28, 1978, New York City gave the stage of the Radio City Music Hall landmark status. But that didn't mean the theater itself would be preserved. Radio City's management could still plead financial hardship. And with the yearly loss projected at over $3 million, some kind of change was inevitable.
And what's to become of the music hall? Well, this press release here says it could become a department store, or maybe a shopping center, or an office building.
Jacques Cousteau, for quite some time, had hoped to use the interior of the theater and to make it sort of a environmental study center.
The world famous radio. Ladies and gentlemen, I just chilled.
The final performance was scheduled for April 12, 1978. One last sellout crowd jammed into the music hall, hoping to feel that energy, to tap into the magic, to see one last show at Radio City.
It was press crowded into the aisles of the theater, and a whole audience full of people who were just huge fans of Radio City and the Rockettes. So I found sitting around me a lot of people that replicated the kind of feelings I had. And there was a whole group of us there, 6,000 of us, all there with this very emotional support. The Rockettes had a huge standing ovation, that flowers were being thrown on the stage, and the love and the support from the audience was absolutely phenomenal. The curtain came down on the stage show, and that was it. Everybody left looking at everything for the very last time. We thought we'd never see the place again, and that it was just going to be history after that evening. And then the next morning, we open up the papers and hear that there was a reprieve. That night at the party at the Rainbow Room across the street from the music hall, it was announced that the music hall was going to be saved.
As part of the deal to rescue Radio City, movies which had saved Radio City in its earliest days were largely dropped, and in their place would be Roxy's original vision, a theater dedicated to the ultimate in entertainment, presenting the world's greatest holiday shows and the world's biggest acts.
Well, it's part of a tradition, but it's also really hip, It's just cool to play there. Because you think who stood on that stage, and it makes you feel good.
I really believe that the Radio City is operated now more the way Roxy envisioned it. Certainly it's not vaudeville, but Radio City is bringing in the singers, the performers that they think they can fill the house with.
I think in a way that Roxy's spirit is kind of hovering over the place a little bit, because it's returned to live entertainment, which is what he wanted. Now, it's a very different kind of live entertainment than Roxy saw in many ways, but it is using this extraordinary building and this fabulous room to present on the world's greatest stage versions of the world's greatest talent.
But while Radio City may still be the world's greatest stage, backstage and in the auditorium, time had taken its toll. So in early 1999, shortly after management of the hall was turned over to the owner of Madison Square Garden, Cablevision, Radio City was closed for 7 months. And for the first time in its long history, given a $70 million top-to-bottom makeover.
We knew that it needed some loving care. Yes, we were basically prepared to go to a restoration. Not necessarily at the levels that we ended up going to, but our enthusiasm for the property sort of spurred us on.
Restoring Radio City to its original grandeur was a daunting task. Decades of accumulated grime and varnish were painstakingly cleansed, the hydraulics beneath the stage completely updated, the 4-ton curtain completely rewoven, and even the marquee's neon tubing, all 6 miles of it, was relit with Roxy's original color, gold, added back.
The seating is all new. The carpet under the seats is all new. The finish on the walls of the auditorium is all new. The stage curtain and all of the gold leafing of the ceilings are all new. The light fixtures are the original. They've been taken apart and polished and put back together.
But the goal of the restoration team was not to remodel Radio City, but to reclaim it. Old photographs and the original color schemes were painstakingly researched, and no detail was overlooked, no matter how minute. Today, the music hall looks almost identical to how it looked on opening night.
It is amazing. It is literally like walking back into 1932. It was a different culture, and this is one of the places that you can go back and visit that and feel it. You'll see it in the detail and everywhere you look in Radio City.
The results of this painstaking renovation can be seen in every corner of this majestic theater. From the massive 3-story Fountain of Youth mural in the grand foyer to the luxurious lounges.
There's a different theme in each of the bathrooms and each of the lounges. There are women's rooms completely surrounded by mirrors so that there are infinite number of reflections. All of that's been taken apart, polished, and looks brand new with chromium frames, brand new. No one will believe it.
But Radio City Music Hall's heart is ultimately its auditorium. A showpiece inspired by the rising sun and now restored to its original glory.
The auditorium is a room made of light. It's all indirect. Each of the coves in the auditorium, that marvelous, great sunrise, can operate independently. There never was a room like this before, and there still isn't. I hope it will be a reaction of unbridled joy. And I hope that people won't say, oh, look what they've done to this place, however. I hope they'll look around in astonishment and say, oh, I always loved it here. How wonderful to have it back.
It was built in the darkness of the Great Depression, a beacon of hope, a light that would shine all over America. And now, in the 21st century, Radio City Music Hall's light is brighter than ever.
I think that Radio City is going to return really as the premier great stage, at least of the Western world, maybe the entire world.
Radio City Music Hall will be here as long as there's a New York City, and it'll be held in affection as long as there are people who care about popular entertainment.